Okay, so we will start today's meeting. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Sitara Anjum. I am the chair of this committee, Resident Engagement, and my colleague, Councillor Julian Gallagher, is the vice chair. So we will start with the meeting agenda item. Just to let everyone know that the item number 7, that is the presentation from the Young Ealing Foundation, that has been deferred to the next meeting. They are unable to make it in today's meeting. So we will go ahead with the remaining agenda item. So is there any apologies for absence, substitution, or lateness?
No, we've only got apologies from the expert witnesses that we were expecting for item 7, Chair. Okay. So it was representatives from Young Ealing Foundation and Young Ealing Champions.
Okay, that's all right.
Chair,
okay, yes.
Chair, just to say I might have to leave at 8:30. My apologies for having to leave a little early.
Okay, well, we will hope to finish by then because we have a shorter agenda tonight. Okay, so the item number 2 is any urgent matters? No? Okay, any matters to be considered in private?
No, Chair.
Okay, declaration of interest, anyone has got any?
No.
Okay, and the meetings of the previous minutes, have you seen and have you found any discrepancy? If yes, then please let us know. If not, then let us know if we can go ahead and agree with that.
You're perfectly agreed, Chair.
Yes, agree the minutes, Chair. Yes, yes.
Agreed, Chair.
Okay, so this is an accurate record of the previous meeting. That's fine. This is all agreed. So we will start with our presentation. And this is the council's communication. So in tonight's meeting, we are actually discussing and reviewing council's website and all the communication channels like social media and how we use that channel to communicate with our residents in the borough. So this presentation will be handled by Kieran Reid and Joanna Sumner and Carl Woolham and Keith Lewis. So I will hand over to them. So please present your item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'll kick off. Good evening, members, and apologies again for my technical problems in joining. I'm Kieran Reid, Director of Strategy and Engagement. I'll kind of open the item. I'll hand over to Keith Lewis, who is our Deputy Head of Communications, who will run you through some of the overview of the channels we use, we have access to, and how we deploy them, which audiences, and so on. We're also joined this evening by Carl Wellham. Carl has joined us as interim head of communication. Some of you will know our permanent head of communications is off sick at the moment. So Carl's been here, this is his second week, so he's probably here in an observational capacity and to understand your priorities, members. Haji, is it possible to share the presentation on the screen so we can walk through it?
So, because normally you'd get the officers doing that, because the scrutiny officer is doing the minutes as well.
Okay, Keith, would you mind sharing the presentation? And that's possible. I've had to log in on my personal device because of my technical problems. So, Keith, if you can hear me, would you be able to share the presentation?
I'm trying to. I've got a message coming up saying disabled share.
No, so I've just given you that, so it should be able to do that.
Apologies, members. While we're just trying to get that live, perhaps if I just set the context of what we're going to cover. And this meeting, we were going to cover the work primarily led by the council's corporate communications team, focusing on our kind of proactive, what you might call broadcast communication and engagement work. We're going to cover consultation, face-to-face engagement, and the higher end, if you like, of the engagement spectrum at later meetings with particular input from Joanna Sumner and her team. Thank you, Keith. I'm certainly seeing the presentation start to come through, so that's very helpful. Just a couple of words of context on the way we're sort of structured and the way we're doing our work. So the corporate communications team, if we can move to the next slide, is structured and tasked to deliver on priority activity around 3 corporate campaigns aligned to the administration's priorities: good jobs, climate crisis, fighting inequality. So obviously we're relatively early in the life of this administration, so those campaigns are still developing. This is how we worked prior to COVID as well, although clearly during COVID we worked very differently. In addition to those priority campaigns, there are a number of other functions which the corporate team is expected to deliver. Clearly COVID work at the moment, but also media handling, internal comms, to develop and modernise and make sure we have the appropriate communications channels, and to support core activity. I mean, I've given a couple of examples of the elections and emergency management, but there are clearly other kind of operational service priorities. If we could flick on one, the presentation is going to give you an overview of the channels and platforms that we have access to and we utilise. So Keith will speak to these in more detail. Just the point, I think, from my perspective, is to say it's deliberately a broad range of tools looking to access a wide range of audiences. And whilst there is an ever-growing focus on our digital channels to access and communicate with local residents, print around Ealing Magazine does, and other kind of physical communications remain an important part of the strategy. Just another, on the next slide, another note, which I know members were keen to explore, was around translation. We touched on this briefly at the last meeting. So the council's primary communications activity is conducted in English. Obviously, that's the language of choice for the vast majority of residents. So the ONS data actually, suggest over 90% of residents are able to kind of function and communicate in that way. Clearly, we're a large London borough, so those smaller percentages are still a significant number of people for whom that may be difficult. The approach, which we've done more and more of during COVID, it's fair to say, is to try and signpost activity, make activity available in community languages linked to the activity. So that's easier for us online, to be honest. So we can translate sections, auto-translate sections of ealing.gov, and we also have that functionality on the new Around Ealing platform. In communications we're producing, it's not practical or cost effective to communicate in all languages. Typically when we do community translation, we focus on the 9 most used languages. So what you'll have seen is, and I'll give you some examples in later slides, particularly during COVID, we've looked to either make web information available or signpost people to where more information can be found, either online where it can be translated, or where they might be able to know there was something that was important and ask a family member or community member who could sort of translate material for them. We have worked with some community language speakers to produce direct content, for example, around video, although that I would say is probably the exception rather than the rule. We may come back to this issue as we move through the presentation. So if we just click on the last slide for me before I hand over to Keith, just in terms of that scene setting, is clearly as a local authority supporting a population of over 340,000, we've got, you know, very broad range of demographics we're trying to communicate with and reach. Some of the key considerations would be around who uses what channels. So I talked a bit about language and access. ONS data indicates that most residents have internet access. You know, again, over 9 in 10. So that makes it a credible channel to communicate with the vast majority of residents. And I think the data tells us that most residents are comfortable receiving information online. Confidence drops, particularly amongst older groups, for transactional information, but for the recipients receiving information, broad sort of confidence. That does vary by borough, and it is definitely lower amongst some demographics and geographies. We think about where people do go. Again, almost 9 in 10 adults have used social networking platforms, but you'll be familiar, I'm sure, that the demographics and the usage profile of Facebook, for example, very different to Twitter, very different again to Instagram and other accounts. So we do consider that. And lastly, I've already made the point, although our resident survey information is a few years old now, 40%, which is one of the highest single sources of residents, said that was where they got most of their information from the council about. So it does continue to be an important channel for us to communicate physically via Round Ealing. So that's a little bit of context. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Keith, our Deputy Head of Communications, who's going to give you a brief overview of the channels that we've got and how we deploy them. Thank you.
Apologies, I'm having to toggle between 2 screens to get the presentation. Can I just check, are you still seeing the main green slide presentation on your screens?
No.
Not at the moment, Keith.
Okay, bear with me now. I've unmuted my microphone. I'll reshare the presentation.
Okay, it's back.
Are you now seeing the presentation again?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Okay. Just before I dive into the detail of this, just a point, the quick overview point. What we've done here is essentially present the council's own channels, the way that we use our owned channels across web, digital and indeed print. What this doesn't cover in all detail is the totality of the channels that we do sometimes use, because obviously we do sometimes use, where budget allows, some of the paid for media on top of these as well. But largely our focus tends to be on our owned channels. I'm actually still struggling because I'm no longer able to move through the presentation for some reason. Bear with me 1 second. Apologies for this. It's not, unfortunately, toggling. I'm going to stop sharing and then share again. Bear with me again 1 second. Right, are you seeing that now?
Not yet.
Not yet, no.
Okay, I'll try one more time, a different way. Try screen. Unfortunately, let me just see if I can change the settings on the presentation.
Seeing your screen now,
Yeah.
but not the presentation. No, we're not seeing it.
Showing the entire screen. Apologies for this. I've never actually shared a presentation on Zoom before because we obviously use Teams primarily. So I'm sharing my screen.
That's all in order. That's good. Looking good.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What I can't, unfortunately, do is access. Did that move for you?
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Apologies for the delay on that. Okay, so starting with something which presumably will be familiar to pretty much everyone on the call, the council website, ealing.gov.uk. Obviously extensively used and accessed by residents, but primarily it's accessed and it's used for transactional type activity, whether that be, paying council tax, accessing refuse recycling, booking services or reporting type functionality. And we know that most people actually come into the website on specific pages looking for the things that they particularly want to see. So very few of our users actually come through the homepage of the website. Only about 11% of the total volume of traffic coming into the council website actually access via the homepage, which is the only place in which we actually present news type communications on the website. Therefore, what we do tend to do is focus much more in terms of our web and digital communications offer on what's now the aroundealing.com website. This was formerly ealingnewsextra.co.uk. We relaunched this particular platform, which operates very much as a central hub for all of our communications at the end of August of this year. So it's only actually been operational live now for something like six or 7 weeks. The usage of the platform has pretty much doubled in the last 2 years. It now attracts something like 50,000 visits, unique visitors every month. That traffic is primarily driven through our other digital channels, whether that's us pushing people to the content on aroundealing.com through our social channels, or largely and predominantly through our weekly email product, which I'll come to in a minute. But the point I'm making there is it's largely not sort of organic search content, people looking for news and information. It tends to be based primarily, the traffic tends to be based around people that we are sort of directing to view the content on the site. We reconfigured the site in August to address a number of technical issues we were having with the old platform, but whilst doing so, we took the opportunity to make a number of quite important improvements on the site. We've obviously optimized the site in terms of navigation and for people viewing the site through mobile devices, which is obviously key in terms of how people access web digital content. But we've also done some work to consolidate space on the site, to pull forward and consolidate content around 3 top priority campaigns that Kieran referenced on one of the earlier slides. So people can now pull content through on tackling climate crisis or creating good jobs or fighting inequality. Another fairly neat trick on the site, it also allows you to surface information specific to their local area or town. I happen to live at Ealing Broadway, so I can pull down a grouping of information, news and other content that's specific and tagged to my particular area of the borough. We've done some work to improve the way that video content functions on the site. We are increasingly producing video content, which I'll come to in a moment. Just a couple of illustrations of what that actually looks like in practice for anyone who may not have visited the site already. On working from left to right, on the left-hand side, you can see the navigation there for the 3 priorities. As well as we've continued to have a focus clearly on health-related issues, particular reference to COVID, of course, and also based on residents' interest, user interest, based on statistics that we pull through. We obviously understand that popular topics around leisure, culture, what I can do in my neighbourhood in the borough are really important to our residents. And then the locations, obviously one navigation tab there for each of the different towns within the borough. Video content, that's static. I'm afraid I can't show you on this particular presentation how that plays on the site. And on the far right, it's just an example of how the themed content comes together in this example of creating good jobs in one particular place. As a team, we have a kind of a responsibility or an involvement in a number of the other websites, web platforms that the council has within its overall estate of web platforms, working very closely with Joanna's team in community engagement, the Do Something Good platform. We've obviously developed during the COVID pandemic the Ealing Together platform based around the kind of community response and the offer for those who are most vulnerable during COVID. And another example there, the Ealing Work West platform, which is a central hub around employment and skills, opportunities and offers. All of those platforms also have their own subscriber databases and mailing lists, which also come in very useful when we are doing subject-specific communications. Around Ealing magazine will obviously be familiar. We're now funded to deliver 3 editions per year. That's currently scheduled for September, the back to school edition, December and March. This year we piloted a summer special, a self-funding summer special, which had much more of a commercial feel to it in terms of the volume of advertising summer event listings, while still carrying a reasonable volume of editorial content about things that were happening over the summer months and key communications from that point in time. We're still delivering to something like 138,000 households and businesses every time we go out. We've got the cost of the magazine now driven down through arrangements for commercial advertising, but still, it is still one of the biggest items of expenditure within the overall communications budget. And we know people still find it an invaluable source of information. The latest data we have is a little bit out of date now from the 2018 resident survey, but at that point in time, 39%, just under 40% said that that was their main source of information about the council. The Around Ealing Extra, the weekly news update. I'm sure many of you will receive this every week. Certainly all councillors should be on our list. This was previously the COVID-19 weekly update in line with the relaunch of the aroundealing.com website. We rebadged this. The focus has become less sort of intensively on pure sort of COVID and pandemic related communications, a much broader base of content now being delivered through the email platform. We have a database of something in the region of about 120,000 recipients on that. That database was something we did an awful lot of work on during COVID. We pulled a number of different databases from across the organisation together while still complying, obviously, with GDPR requirements. We pulled together a number of databases, including not least the entire database on the council's My Account platform. We've seen very high levels of engagement. We know how effective the channel is. Currently open rates in the region, depending on the edition, which week, in the range of 45 to 55%. Early stages of the pandemic, that was actually peaking at around about 65% of recipients were opening it. And click-through rates, again, they go up and down. Some news, some communications items inevitably drive a higher number of click-through rates than others, but usually talking the ballpark of about 25% of those who open the email will actually click through at least one, or if not more, of the articles that are delivered. The email tool is used really to drive traffic to other things. It's very light in detail in terms of what's actually delivered. So we're obviously directing people primarily to the aroundealing.com platform, but we also link where relevant to more informational content on ealing.gov, or sometimes third-party websites such as the NHS or government websites where appropriate to do so. Within the overall database, we have different audience segments, whether that be for businesses, business audience, community faith groups, and we do have some quite limited ability to target people geographically in different areas of the borough where we do have access to their postcode data. And here's just some examples of how the email sort of stacks up on a weekly basis. As I mentioned just now, we also have a requirement clearly to communicate directly with our business audience, and we also have a fortnightly business update product that we also send out to something like 15,000 businesses that we have on a subscriber database. So very business focused content will go directly to that particular audience group in the Ealing Business Update email. Open rates on this one lower than the
Can you mute your mic, please? Councillors, mute your mic.
Am I okay to move on?
Sure, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So yeah, engagement rates, the business product, email product, slightly lower than the levels of engagement we have with residents. Open rates tend to move between sort of 30–35%, and click-through rates on the business email also slightly lower. Social media channels. The numbers here on the number of followers. I believe on the next slide we've got a kind of a benchmarking slide which shows you how we stack up in terms of the numbers of followers that we have across our own social media channels in comparison to some of the other neighbouring boroughs. So I'll come back to the numbers in a minute. We use them extensively, as everyone will understand. We use Twitter, we use Facebook, we use Instagram, and we also use Nextdoor. Those are the main channels, social channels that we use. We haven't branched into some of the more emerging social media channels yet. People will be familiar with TikTok, which has very much a kind of a youth sort of audience behind it. There's arguments for and against council having a TikTok account, whether or not young people would want to engage with the council through TikTok is a little bit moot, given the nature of the consumption, the way they actually consume media on some of those channels. We've obviously been growing these channels over time. The growth tends to be incremental, fairly organic. There's no sort of quick win on this. It is just about delivering engaging content, the right kind of content, consistently to help drive that growth. So I was just referencing just now, so you can see where we stack up in relation to some of our neighbouring West London boroughs here. We're better than some, not quite as good as others in terms of our overall sort of follower numbers. Generally speaking, on Twitter, we're in about the middle of the pack. Hillingdon is a bit of an outlier in many respects, significantly higher number of followers on Twitter than any of the other boroughs. Instagram, we're doing pretty well. We've put quite a big focus on Instagram over the last 12 months in terms of ensuring our content is right and it's engaging. And on Facebook, again, we're probably in the middle of that sort of benchmark list in terms of our numbers. This is just a couple of examples of how we've been approaching sort of content. Clearly, we also, in addition to a sort of slightly more light-hearted, engaging sort of approach to sort of visual presentation, we also do very serious messaging, of course, across Twitter, across Facebook, and indeed across Instagram. But these are just a couple of examples to highlight how we sort of approach some of our social media assets visually. I mentioned video content a little while back. Increasingly important. We know everybody knows who works in communications, video content is the most likely to drive high levels of engagement of any kind of content we can produce. Clearly, there's a time cost producing video content. Editing video content can take quite a lot of time, but we do ensure that when we do produce video content, we deploy that across multiple channels. So we put it onto the aroundealing.com website, we put it through our social channels. We do have a dedicated council YouTube channel, and where it's appropriate to do so, we also boost those videos through using paid-for applications on both websites, on digital platforms, and on social media platforms. So we use video content in a variety of ways. We have been using it quite extensively over the last 3 or 4 months for key announcements, member-led announcements, but we also use it for more sort of marketing campaign type purposes and for driving sort of behaviour change, for example, around climate action. We do think very carefully about audiences, obviously, and we create content for specific audiences. So if we are targeting young people, we think about how content will work, how content will be appealing, engaging, and resonate with our particular audience groups. These are just some static examples of what we've done. The top left of that screen just shows the council YouTube channel. That's actually broken down into sections. So you can drill down into video content relating to particular themes. We do need to do some work on this at the moment to reconfigure the way that we've packaged our YouTube channel to speak more clearly now to the new 3 priority themes. But certainly that's a piece of work we'll be undertaking shortly. And then just some examples using both filmed video content, as well as using a more graphic approach within our video content. Digital marketing is a really key tool for us. So this is paid for, but we do use it very, very extensively, primarily working with our partner, the Council Advertising Network, who have all kinds of clever tools that allow us to target our digital marketing, our digital advertising, digital communications across social media platforms, across websites, including national media sites, including local media sites. The beauty of the digital marketing campaigns, it does allow us to target people geographically based on the IP address, the location of their IP address. So if we want to speak specifically to people in Acton, we can deploy digital marketing to people who we believe we understand to be in or living in the Acton area. We can target people by interest, subject interest, the things that they browse online. And to a degree, we can also target people when we are deploying digital communications in specific languages based on their consumption online, for example, music consumption or consumption of community language media sites. We can target people in that way as well. Extensive reach, the reach is actually infinite, depends what you pay for, but it also has the ability within the ad server technology to target people, retarget them with follow-up communications, and also enables us to in a very sophisticated way to target what are defined as sort of look-alike audiences. So if we know that one group of one demographic is opening our digital communications, we can retarget people who share similar characteristics. We use this extensively during COVID, in particular around our targeting of BAME communities and younger people. A really, really key tool for us. Local media, as most of you will probably be aware, has diminished significantly over the last sort of decade, in particular over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. We no longer obviously have a significant print local media presence in the borough. But we do continue obviously to deliver our media releases, our key statements, key announcements through to more regional media like Metro, BBC London, ITV London, The Standard, etc., as well as obviously distributing our key statements and releases to those local media, such as the Ealing Today platform and some of the ethnic community media as well. We know from the data that we're seeing that the reach and the impact of local media, in particular print media, has quite significantly declined. In 2018, that had dropped to 26% of residents saying they get information from the Ealing Gazette. That had gone down from 35% in 2014. And I think we all know that if we carry out exercise again today, it's probably going to be under 20%, possibly as low as 10 to 15%. That's actually the last slide in the presentation. So, Chair, I'll refer back to you in terms of how you'd like either to revisit any of these slides or to obviously take any questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Keith. Very, very interesting. And I'm sure the panel members will have plenty of questions. So I will open the Q&A section. So let's see who is there to ask the question. Please raise your hands if there are any questions. Anybody has got questions?
Hi, Chair. I've raised my hand, but I'm not sure if you can see it.
Okay, yeah, I can see in the window. Yeah, the video. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentations and some of the points where I didn't realise about in terms of the reach of the digital and the number of connections and click-throughs, which is quite encouraging, knowing how click-throughs are a good measure of engagement. A couple of points about the digital aspect. It was interesting noting how few come through the homepage. I know my own personal use of the website, I normally do a web search with Ealing Council and the subject, because I do find navigating through the website from the homepage quite clunky, and I know it has things there, but it's often not apparent where they might be, and it's not always connected through. So that might be a bit of an answer to why so few go through the homepage. I just offer that as my experience. The other thing about is all these satellite sites as well, Do Something Good, Ealing Together, Ealing Work West. And I don't know if Act for Ealing, they're like the environment one, it also fits into this category. It might do, it might not. But I know Do Something Good and Ealing Together have next to no acknowledgement of the council's involvement. Do Something Good has an acknowledgement right at the bottom of the page. You have to scroll right the way down, and it's just Percival House's address. Ealing Together, again, has just a copyright. Well, the copyright is for Ealing Together. It isn't not even acknowledgement of the council has got a role there. And the Ealing Work West has a logo right at the bottom of the page, so you have to scroll down for it. So I'm just wondering why this choice? Why are we not making sure that people know that the council is doing this, maybe packaging it differently, but not so that people can make an association that Ealing Together, although it was a collective endeavour of lots of different agencies coming together and lots of participants, but I think probably the glue for that was the council, and do something good. It's really strange. It's all access to Ealing's support for voluntary activities, but you really have to mine it to find out a link to the council, which is really strange, I think. I don't know what we're bashful about. So some sort of responses about those 2 points, and how the website isn't that navigable really, which is probably why you get so few going through the homepage, and this number of sort of sister sites that are sponsored by the council but don't seem to have that much recognition of it. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Paul Driscoll. Yes, Keith, you want to come back on that?
I can respond to some of that. I mean, the council website, I mean, it is a huge and sprawling website, and clearly we do understand that it's far from perfect in terms of navigation on the website. But we're obviously, with the council website, we're not dealing with the same kind of animal, if you like, as a banking website. A banking website is delivering a much smaller number of pieces of information, products and services. So there are inherent problems with any council website. But I think we would all accept the last iteration of the design of the council website and the structure of the council website was now, 6-7 years ago, at the very least, if not longer. Website design moves on. The way that you can guide and navigate through a website, some of the technologies, some of the approaches have changed. So I think we would probably accept that's fair comment. The council website isn't always the easiest of things to navigate. What we do is regularly review the sort of statistics on the website to ensure that the things that most people are accessing most often are the things which are displayed most prominently on the homepage. But clearly it's impossible to provide primary navigation to every single service, every single area of the council on the homepage. So there are difficulties in there. In terms of the badging and the kind of the branding and the presentation of the council on some of those satellite websites, that's a more difficult one to answer. Some of them are clearly representing a broader sort of coalition of interests beyond just the council being perhaps the key player and the agent that's sort of driven those websites, but there are obviously other parties involved. I haven't been directly involved in the design of all three of those platforms, whilst they've been delivered or supported by members of my team or the wider communications team. So I can't answer directly as to why decision was taken to position council logo sort of bottom left rather than top left, for example. But I think, yeah, it's a fair comment which we can take on board.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, I mean, I also have some comments about the interface of the homepage of Ealing Council. I mean, most of the residents, they said they would like to see what consultations are going on at the moment and how they can participate. And like Councillor Driscoll said, you know, why we do not have the connection between the main website and the other website, because a lot of people, they do not know. I think it will be very useful if we have hyperlink of these websites from the main website, so that people know that this also belongs to council and they can find some information. I mean, the current website interface is not very user friendly. You have some tabs, you know, that gives obviously the most popular used services, but it doesn't have the other information that people would like to see. I mean, we will come back to the transactional side as well, because I mean, this is a common complaint. even we received quite a few emails from residents that they want to contact council, or they want to report some missed collection or order some bin bags or bins, or any other problem related to car parking permits, things like that, and they do not get any response. So they get really, really frustrated. So I think these are, apart from the design, the interface and connectivity of the external websites with the main website, is something that, in my view, council has to really, really review it.
Chair, could I respond there? It's Carl Wellham, the interim head of communications.
Okay.
There are two immediate reactions. One is that we have had an expert looking at our communications from a company called Comms 2.0. He's a guy that's got a very, very strong reputation, particularly in looking at e-communication channels and digital communication channels, and we're expecting him to produce his report later this month. I am absolutely sure that he will reflect your own and Councillor Driscoll's views about the navigatability of the front page in particular. And if it's been 6 years or more since the council last sort of redesigned its website, it is well due another look. And I think I've certainly noted, and I'm sure my colleague Keith and Kieran have noted all members' comments on things like accessibility, how well the hyperlinks work, how easy it is to report issues. It's really important that we have a proper look at this. It's not easy. It's sometimes not cheap to do this, but I absolutely take on board what members are saying about this, and it is really, really important that we have a look at it. So I think that's a completely separate piece of work. It's one strand of what we've talked about tonight, but I think it's very much a focused piece of work on its own, is to bring the council website up to the best it can possibly be and improve the quality and the standards of it. But it's not something that's easy to fix overnight, because once you start looking at it, you find layer upon layer upon layer of stuff that needs to be resorted. But I think we can take away that this is absolutely a member priority.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one is Councillor Julian Gallagher. You want to ask?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Keith, thank you very much for this presentation. It was brilliant, and I think it's one of the very few PowerPoint presentations I've ever heard that hasn't sent me to sleep. So that is what I call a really good engagement presentation. Thank you very much. I've got just one question. You talked about the sort of take-up rate and the hit rate, and they look good. They look quite good compared to the neighbouring boroughs. That's great. The question is, what are you going to? There's no such thing as enough. What are you doing to actually promote that and to develop that? And the other thing you mentioned was about TikTok, which at the moment the council's avoiding TikTok. I confess that I am a TikTok user, and I think it's good. It brings in the whole thing about entertainment, and this is actually quite important. This is quite profound. If we want to make the council, if you want to create this kind of friendly image of the council, that it's a friend that sort of accompanies you and is there to help. We've got to get into that kind of entertainment thing. We've got to look good. We've got to look attractive. And I think I don't see any reason why we shouldn't actually open up a TikTok account as well and be players in that whole kind of entertainment arena.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I was being slightly flippant. We've not yet engaged with TikTok. I suspect there will come a time when it will become the right time for us to do so. But as you've just said, TikTok is largely about entertainment and engagement. So we'd need to think very carefully about the nature and the type of the content that we are able to create, and the subjects and the themes and the issues that we want to address over that particular platform. So we're not there yet. That doesn't mean to say that we will never get onto TikTok, which is not there yet. In terms of your other point, which is a really important one, where do we go from here? We've sort of identified a piece of work that we need to pick up now, which is a kind of a growth strategy and a content strategy around those social media platforms. So that's a live conversation within the team at the moment. And I also suspect it will be a theme that emerges from the review, the external review that Carl was just referencing. But there'll be some additional kind of impetus behind that, but certainly a content strategy and a growth strategy is where we need to go next.
And if I could just follow up on that, Chair, as well.
Sure.
I think one of the challenges and the balance for the team is we know that the different channels are consumed by different people for different purposes. So the ideal content strategy is to customize the content the council's producing by theme and by platform. You know, it will be appropriate to talk about climate change on Facebook differently to inequality on Twitter. In reality, and we are trying to do that, and similarly differently again for, you know, jobs to young people on Instagram or for example. There is obviously a practical constraint about our ability to produce that range of content, and what we want to do is when we've got a channel, to maintain it, to grow it, to have a place that people go to, rather than sort of we launch it and then it falls into disrepair or hasn't been posted to, or just is very generic content. So completely agree with the thrust of your challenge to us, councillor, but that's some of the thinking that, as Keith described, we're doing within the team about how we can try and execute it well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a good observation. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of businesses are also advertising on TikTok, so it's not just an entertainment channel. I mean, they are obviously taking advantage of the popularity of the channel that a lot of people are using, especially youngsters. So I think council should also consider if they can utilize that channel to our advantage. Okay, so the next one is Matthew Coolam. This is our co-opty.
Hello there. Can everyone see and hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Shall I introduce myself first for anyone who doesn't know me already? Okay, so yeah, I'm Matthew Coolam. I work for Ealing MENCAP, but I'm also the Service Development Manager for the Ealing Advice Service Consortium, which is a consortium of 10 charities, 10 local charities that delivers advice in the borough. There's no Citizens Advice Bureau in Ealing, so we sort of deliver something that's similar. Yeah, we deliver advice to around about 6,000 people annually. If it's not a COVID year, it was around about 4,500 during COVID. And we're mainly delivering remote advice. People tend to come to us when they're in a crisis. They come to us as a crisis resolution service. So it may be that they've got red letters from utility companies, or they haven't paid their council tax, they're about to get evicted, etc. So it's really important that we have accurate information as quickly as possible. I guess there's a couple of things. One of the things is about what can we do for the council. So how can we impart the information that you want to impart to the residents, to our clients. I guess the other thing as well is about how the council can help us by making sure the information is available quickly and it's relevant. There's a certain thing with information overload, and in particular during COVID that was apparent. We were getting bulletins every day. It'd be nice to be able to get some sort of bulletin from the council which really just bullet points the things that are in around Ealing, but the main key changes and the main key developments. It doesn't need to be pretty, it doesn't need to be glammed up or anything like that at all. It just really needs to be sort of like facts that then we can impart to the clients when we're providing advice to them. I know Councillor Driscoll mentioned satellite sites. Two of the ones that haven't been mentioned, which we tend to use quite a lot, are Locator, which is the social housing register site, and also CarePlace, which is the directory of local services, local social welfare services. And I would say that both of those, I mean, Locator obviously is very, very heavily used, but there's questions as to whether it's user friendly. And I would say that the CarePlace site has potential, but is heavily underused, and not a lot of people know about it. It's not advertised on the front page of the council's website, as far as I can tell. The other thing around the presentation of the front of the council's website, if you look at other local authorities and see which ones are probably the most effective, the ones that really stand out, I would say, I've had a look at a few, and I'd say that Kingston's are quite a good example as to how it can be done. They've got more than just 4 buttons on the front screen. For example, if we've got somebody who wants information about social care, they have to hunt around for it on the Ealing Council website. Whereas on the Kingston one, there's a button there, adult social care. You click on it, it gets you straight to where you want to go. So that's sort of those sort of like key things, I guess. And I guess when I mentioned like how can we help the council, we get a lot of information about demographics, the people that are most in need of support, trends about languages that are spoken from the people that are coming to us when they're in crisis. For example, during COVID, we saw a lot more people from the Middle Eastern countries and Afghanistan, and in particular speakers of Arabic, Farsi, Dari and Pashto, who was really struggling to access information in a language that they could understand. And also we can help when it comes to things like seasonal trends. So it's making sure that advice and information is in line with demand. So in spring, it's usually around council tax. In the winter, it's around rough sleepers and where to find night shelters and where to get food when it's cold and things like that. And we have that information. And I'd also say that legislative trends as well. For example, when universal credit's going to be cut shortly, people are going to be we're going to be needing advice and information about food bank vouchers, for example, or additional sources of income and things. So yeah, so that's sort of really what I had to say. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that I mentioned. But yeah, I think that's really what I was saying. Yeah.
Thank you for your contribution, Matthew.
Okay.
Is there any more comments? I think, yeah, I quite concur with what you said about the directory. Quite a lot of people say that there are lots of stakeholders, different organizations working in Ealing, but they do not know how to find them. So that is something which can be considered, that, if we can gather all this information and we can, make like a directory type of section on the website where people can find and they can contact them, that will be very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think potentially because there was a lot of investment in that site when it was launched. I don't think many people know about it, and it has the potential to really help people. The problem that the council's got is the same as the problem that Ealing Advice Service has got, but we've got it on a much smaller level, is that we're trying to be everything to everyone, where people are coming to us about all sorts of issues. And with the directory, it could potentially turn into the yellow pages. So I think it's about making sure that there are very clear parameters as to what we're providing advice and information about and what sits outside of that. And it might make it a little bit clearer and easier for people to find information, and also less overwhelming as well when it comes to delivering it.
Okay, thank you very much. Does any officer wants to get back, or shall I move on with the next one?
Perhaps if I briefly just respond, Chair, because there's some important points that Matthew's raised. So the Care Place site and Locata, as well as the Ealing Families Directory, which if you navigate deep into the children's bit of the site, they're managed separately. So they're not managed by Keith's team. That's not, not to say they're not important, and clearly we need to, it's how residents access the information that's most kind of important. In terms of, so we can certainly take that feedback away, and I think there is some thought about how information could be structured and the points people have made about resident facing. Just, I suppose, to give members and partners a bit of assurance, within the constraints of the current site, we do regularly review the traffic, as Keith said, the customer journeys and the options you're prompted with, the hierarchies, the groupings, are all informed by the statistics on usage of the sites, and they're all geared towards getting people as quickly as possible with the fewest number of clicks to the vast majority of the information. That's not meant to sound defensive. I completely accept that there are particular areas of the site where that doesn't work as well as we would like, and it would be ideal, I think, if the council were able to to afford the provision to upgrade the site and the content. But within the constraints which are currently on Keith's team, there is quite a lot of work to try and ensure that we can do that. There have been some really helpful suggestions around the front page? Could we signpost people more clearly to, for example, consultations or how to have your say in the borough? Certainly very in keeping with the administration's priorities out in the council plan, and probably realistically some longer term conversations about content around things like the families directory or care place, but really important themes. So I just wanted to acknowledge the contributions really, and to say that they will feature in our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next one, I can see Councillor Louise Barrett has raised her hands.
Hi, yeah, thanks again for the presentation. I've got kind of a few points and hands up. I'm actually from a comms background, so I'm asking kind of with that hat on really. The Around Ealing magazine, you mentioned that is quite a significant proportion of spend from a comms perspective. I've worked on magazines quite a few years ago, and what always came up time and time again is how you measure the effectiveness and how you measure the user rate, because circulation doesn't actually translate into people actually picking it up and reading it and digesting that information. So have we looked at ways of trying to see if there's a way of assessing that? And also the cost, it would be interesting to know versus some of the other ways of communicating, what the cost is for that, and whether we think that is efficient. Leading on from that is around the 2018 resident survey, which says 39% use it as the main source of information. I mean, I'm intrigued as to when we're going to do another resident survey and to see whether that data has changed. Given the kind of much more online aspect that all of our lives have changed in the last 18 months, 2 years, because that might be an interesting thing to kind of delve into on cost efficiencies. And also just again on the resident survey, like it would be interesting to know how many residents actually responded to the survey, because whether that gives a true reflection. So that's kind of that on the magazine stuff. And then just you mentioned around kind of, you've broken down, which was great, around Twitter, Facebook, Insta, and our level of followers. But I suppose from my perspective, I would want to see kind of the next level of data drilled down into kind of what our levels of engagement are, because for example, you mentioned around 6 posts a day on Facebook. That seems like quite a lot, and even having a quick glance while we're on this call, the levels of engagement on those posts are almost next to nothing. So that might be something when you're looking at the strategy as a whole, to maybe like pare back on that side of things, because in order to get better engagement. So that's from that perspective. And then thirdly, was the other thing around the email. So you've mentioned around, click-through rates and stuff, which, open rates were pretty okay, actually, from the industry standard perspective. But actually how we grow that, and also how we grow the click-through rates, and whether you've actually tested different email formats to different sets of people, and see what the effectiveness of like the layout is, the position of what the information is, and also even down to things like just the title, the subject line, because that's something I worked on quite a lot when I was working at a charity, and we did that quite frequently to then kind of get a better idea of what the how effective our communications is, and how we can actually improve it and make it better, so that we have a lot better click-through rates and engagement levels. So that's from me.
Thank you very much. If officer wants to come back on that.
Yeah, I'll start if I may. Carl Wellham. Again, I'll hand over to Keith and Kieran, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. That was an incredibly high-level run through quite a lot of the stuff that we're doing. I'll try and do justice to some of those things. In terms of the magazine, it's a constant debate. I've worked at a number of councils, and it's always a debate as to whether you do a printed magazine. I'm always reminded of Ben Page, who is now the CEO of Ipsos Mori, saying at many presentations on resident engagement and council reputation, never let go of your magazine, because for many people it's the only way that they hear directly from you as a council. And I've certainly seen that to be the case. Absolutely accept that people have become far more engaged on social media platforms and digital platforms, but there's a vast array of people who are still not engaging on those platforms. So I would defend both the sort of the production and justify the cost of producing a magazine as one of the only ways that we reach some people. Having said that, you're absolutely right that we need to look at the cost and the value, the take up, and I would certainly endorse another resident survey as soon as is practical and possible to get us up to date. I think my colleague Keith said that the last one was in 2018, so that's 3 years ago, soon to be 4 years ago. We definitely should be looking at doing that as soon as that's practical. I'll perhaps hand over to Keith to come back to you on your comments about social media analysis, because I'm sure he's much more versed in those, if that's okay. Is that all right, Keith?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Just to pick up one of the final points, Councillor, you did ask the question, what is the actual cost of the production of the magazine? I did say it forms a fairly significant part of the overall comms team budget, but the overall comms team budget isn't huge. The net cost after sort of revenues taken into account over those editions that we produce is in the region of 48,000 per annum. So that's the overall cost to the council for production of 3 or 4 with the one self-funding sort of version of the magazine. In terms of some of the other points and questions that you raised, in terms of drilling down further into some of those social media sort of metrics and stuff we presented, clearly we just presented here today the kind of the very high level sort of engagement rates. We are obviously tracking those. We use a social media platform called Orlo for the management of all of our social media activity, which provides us with some quite detailed sort of insights into kind of engagement reports, both across particular campaigns and across the overall piece. So we are obviously tracking those. I'm happy to share those with you at a future point in time. I don't have them in front of me right now, obviously. And I think one of your final points was around kind of again drilling down a little bit more beyond the headlines of the open rates and the click-through rates. We are obviously using subject line testing. That's routine on every email that goes out. Different formats. We have a number of different email products, but we haven't actually tried yet sort of testing different sort of formats of the core version of the magazine. What we obviously do, we do a fairly sort of regular sort of, much deeper dive into the data to look at what's working well, what's not working well, particularly in terms of content types. It's inevitable bad news sells. If there's a horror story around sort of, sort of COVID related sort of stories, the numbers tend to go sort of up higher. Some of our softer content inevitably drives slightly different types of numbers and levels of engagement. I think the point I'm just trying to make is we are tracking those, but have we tried different versions, different formats of the core email product? So we do have all the data I suspect that you were thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. No, I wasn't expecting you to have all of the kind of really detailed stuff on you tonight, because as you say, it's top line. Just to respond on the magazine thing, I don't necessarily think that we should not have one, but I suppose my kind of query, or for want of a better expression, is just to kind of, as you've mentioned, that there are some people that aren't really internet savvy and they would rely on that magazine as their only form of interaction with the council. And I suppose it's like maybe reassessing that. and seeing whether we can be much more targeted in our distribution rather than a kind of blanket distribution.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah, very happy to have further discussions on that and to consider it. I suppose as well, it's one of the few forms now of actual physical marketing that we do. And as things go, I mean, I know myself, and I'm not necessarily the demographic that we're targeting, but I know in the age where we get so much stuff now sent to us electronically, to have something actually arrive as a physical product suddenly becomes quite special, I think. So if it's well presented and if it's absolutely packed with information, a lot of which has been mentioned by members and participants tonight as being absolutely vital, I think it can be a really useful tool. What you want is to have something that people keep for several weeks, because it's so packed with useful information that they keep referring to it. But you're absolutely right. We can cut this many different ways and analyse it many different ways. And I'm sure we will accept the challenge that you've given us on that.
So, Chair, just for completeness on Councillor Brett's questions, I think we've covered most of them. We did have some data, wasn't it, in the presentation on usage of the magazine. Again, it's a few years old now, but it indicated that most people read most of it, actually, of the people who responded. So it performed pretty well. Clearly, 3 or 4 years on, whenever a further resident survey is done, it's probably inevitable, isn't it, that percentage may change in terms of changing consumption patterns. And just on the resident survey, the 2018 sample was around about 1,300 people, so able to cut representatively down to sort of town centre level within the borough as well as borough-wide. We would hope that we might be able to run another one in 2022. It's many years ago the council ran annually. That was taken as a budget saving, so we are a little bit more across the board, having to be a little bit more sort of fleet of foot with when we do it. But potentially next summer, although that's not confirmed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there any new question? I can see hands raised by Councillor Gallant and Driscoll. Are they new hands or legacy hands? Okay, Councillor Steed.
Hi, Councillor. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Just 2 quick points. Firstly, to do the magazine, I'd be certainly very much in favour of it being continued. One of the important aspects of the magazine is it's one of the very few places where people can actually look up and find out who their councillor is. And if we're talking about engagement, I think that's a very important point. Secondly, the figures that we've had presented to us on the comparison of Ealing and the other boroughs, I'm always slightly suspicious if we're just presented with absolute numbers. And I would just make the point that some of the other boroughs that we're being compared to, some of them are bigger than Ealing, but population-wise, but some of them, for example, Hammersmith and Fulham, are considerably smaller. So it may be of some use to look a little bit deeper into those figures and make some provide some more context as to the actual percentage reach to the population of the boroughs concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I'll move on to Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points about what Matthew was saying about how La Carta's presented. I don't have access to La Carta because you need the registration to access the site, but if it's presented differently in other boroughs, it would be helpful if officers perhaps contacted the Ealing Advice Service or Ealing Law Centre or other advice agencies and just see how the La Carta services is offered elsewhere, or understand the user experience of that, because that we can have any scope for amending how it's presented in Ealing, and it may be done through La Carta and we've got limited scope, but if there's scope for any change, having that feedback I think would be useful. And around the magazine, often I know it's gone out because I will have people asking me about one of the themes in the magazine. So I think it does show how important it is, and especially with our demographic profile of usage and connections with the internet, because the presentation showed how that was skewed to younger or mid-aged individuals, and older individuals are less likely to have that, and also different demographics in the borough as well, different locations, lower engagement digitally in Southall. That might have changed, but I still think there is a very positive role for that, because it is tangible and people often do make a connection with it. One thing I want to clarify is like the proactive nature of our engagement digitally or elsewhere, in other aspects of our engagement. I mean, I tried to look up as the wheelie bins, for example, 2016, which was a great furore before my time in the council. But I was aware it was very prevalent and a consuming issue. But I wonder at the time, did we try and explain the role of the wheelie bins in promoting recycling? You know, there was an association afterwards with press releases saying that Ealing's recycling rate had increased because we've got now dry mix recycling, and it was much easier to do it. So I don't know whether we ever led with a story saying, well, we've got proof that it's happened elsewhere, and show something a bit more positive. And dare I say the LTN word, or little initials there, and I will declare that I lived in a former LTN, and I do not think it's a pecuniary interest because I think it had no impact on my house price. However, I think there were 14 mentions of the LTNs in around Ealing. The vast majority of those mentions were very functionary. They're about administrative changes that the council had done. It was introducing them, it was changing the layout or the organisation of them, or doing some other mechanical change to the LTNs. But in terms of promoting impact on air quality, other aspects, that was much less, much more diminished. There were little references to air quality now and again, and I think very seldom, and a motivation and an aim towards active travel. Given that it came under the climate change, so that's one of our priorities, and it cut across because it was a COVID response issue, which is the fourth priority. There's a whole plethora of information about low traffic neighbourhoods in terms of what's happened elsewhere. Academic research, real life examples, it's all there. However, none of that was ever used to educate, inform, or try and move the debate on. And what was more worrying, I think, was that the information that we had as a council, either we obtained it from TfL, such as the Scoot information that was in the interim report published in November, that didn't go out into the wider circulation to say, well, look, this is some of the impact. You could find it on the council website, but you had to trawl through a cabinet paper to find it. Not very engaging, but even taking a glimmer of that information from that very long report, but something that might engage somebody, and actually profiling that to allow a link through to the report, not done. When we had air quality data, and the council owns, organises and collects air quality data, and that was available well before the final consultation, not produced, not published, not circulated, not announced, not a sausage. So we had information that was quite positive, and the comparator between non-LTN and LTN area is very similar. Both improved in the air quality, so you can't have air quality improving in LTN area and non-LTN area without questioning was there gridlock in LTNs, but we never published that data. And I think we had access to that data in probably April. November, the collection started, but we didn't actually seek to publish it. I know there's technical questions about validation of data and so on. However, we had it well before the 1st of July, which was when the information went published. The report, which is very extensive, or well, the start of the consultation document, neither was that published really. It was, you can go to the website and find it. But we didn't lead any of our stories with, well, here's a snapshot about bus delays, 45 seconds in most LTN areas at most, and some improved. None of that little snapshot that people could grab hold of that information and think, well, actually, it's worth looking at some of these graphs and what's it about? Where did that come from? We had that information, just didn't use it. So what I'm trying to understand is, what's the role of officers when they say, I think you've got a role here? Or do officers in comms just leave it to the service officers to actually prompt them to say, actually, we've got a bit of useful information, could you use it? What's that dialogue? Is there a dialogue? Do comms officers want to just be driven by the service officers to say, and I can appreciate that because they've got the technical expertise on the service side, but do comms make that positive engagement with non-comms people, i.e. the service officers, to say, well, actually, have you got anything that we can promote? Is there that proactive engagement there to say, well, we should be telling a story out there. We have information and people then can take it from that. So is there that dialogue going on as well? So there's quite a lot in that package there, but I think it does raise a lot of issues about when we have something controversial, do we batten down the hatches and just say, well, we'll just plow on? Or do we say, well, actually, at certain times we have some information, but we should actually make sure that people have access to that. They can see it, they know where it comes from, and that can inform the public debate. Or do we leave it on a website, say we've got a 500-page cabinet report for it, go and read the 500-page cabinet report. What are our aims? How are we engaging people? And how are we using that as a culture in the organisation? So I'd be interested what the responses are to quite a broad package of discussions there. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Driscoll. Very useful input. So is there any response from the officers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's probably one that I'll pick up if that's okay. Thanks, Councillor Driscoll, for the question. If I start broadly, and then pick up a number of the examples that you've used, Councillor. So if we start broad, the role of the communications function for whoever's the administration at the time is to help them communicate their priorities, achieve the change we want to see in the borough, whether it's behaviour change, whether it's particular activities that we want residents to deliver. So that's the purpose, as well as preserving, restoring, promoting the overall kind of reputation of the council, our ability to function through trust, engagement with residents. How the communications team can be effective in doing that, alongside colleagues, not by any means solely the job of the communications team, is, as you've hinted, to take those priorities, to weave them together into a sort of clear and compelling narrative, and I think really importantly for that narrative to resonate with residents, either their cares and their hopes and ambitions for their family, their aspirations or their perspective on their community, the things that residents kind of care about. And it's inevitable that our sort of service colleagues who are professional experts in a policy or a delivery area, that may not be their primary skill set, and I would hope and expect that it is the skill set that the communications team are kind of able to provide and support. And certainly in terms of the structure I've outlined, currently aligned to the tackling the climate crisis, creating good jobs and tackling inequalities priorities, that's the kind of approach we're looking to put in place. Going back to your example around the move to alternate weekly collections, that was one of the first things I worked on when I joined the council. The strategy there was to start big, to talk exactly about that this was a change that was necessary for the council to achieve a step change in recycling performance. That was why the council was implementing that change. That was the administration's policy. As we moved through that campaign, and that was really important, I think, in terms of motivation and buy-in from some residents. Clearly, there were lots of concerns, and it was quite a politically contested policy at the time as well. The closer we got to the announcement, the more we focused in on the practicalities. The bin will be delivered at this time. This is what you need to do with it. This is what goes in it. These are perhaps some of the myth busting, the concerns about hygiene, etc., the issues that were raised. And then as we moved past implementation, And we could see the positive effect that was having on recycling rates in the borough, to celebrate that and to thank and support and celebrate residents' role in that behaviour change. Not absolutely perfect by any means, but overall a kind of successful policy, which I'd like to think the communication strategy was an important part of embedding. Going to your LTNs example, Councillor, I think the same sort of principles kind of apply. There's a lot in the review that's published along with the Cabinet decision on the LTN kind of experience from start to finish. I'm probably not going to try and summarise all of that here this evening, and probably wouldn't do justice to it if I did. But I think that review, which members will have seen, I'm sure, is relatively clear that, from a number of factors, operational pressures, probably some mistakes that were made and losing a little bit of control of that narrative, and so on, the execution collectively by the council probably fell short of what you would consider to be best practice around, that aspiration. I don't think that's solely a communications issue, but definitely it would have, there are clearly ways, and that report is clear, there are ways that across the board communication and engagement with residents through that process could have been better. So I'm probably not going to go into all of the examples, but I hope the response outlines, I think, the thrust of your point about the relationship we would want to have and the role that we would want the communications team to play, and indeed are sort of trying to play now. For example, around members may have seen, we're putting a very strong focus at the moment on communications around the recently launched Good Jobs Plan, the opportunities for residents and employers to play their part, whether it's taking people on or stepping through for business support. So thank you, Jack.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go on.
I think there's a lot of learning from the low traffic neighbourhoods issue, massive in all sorts of ranges, and I wonder how that's going to be applied, because part of it is the council telling its story, or a story, and by its I don't mean what's happening with the council, but what the experience is and what's happening in the borough. So I wonder how aware service officers are about the need to pass on to comms information, data, the stories that they've encountered when delivering the service, so that that message can be passed on. And I wonder if it's seen as, well, that's something that comms does, so then it's comms driven, when really comms should be facilitating and supporting the service role, so that it's a supportive role of presenting what the council is doing, and I wonder if that is part of our culture. I really, just the low traffic neighbourhood experience, because it's the most prevalent one and very painful one for me, I really just question whether service officers had that connection to realise a story, realise a point that was being raised on the doorsteps, was being raised on the streets, that people were talking about, people writing to councillors about it. And I pressed for certain issues to be raised and for data to be gone through on that. And fair credit to officers, they were very diligent and didn't want to jump the gun and didn't want to make assumptions and make the first analysis at the first bit of data they saw. They wanted to delve into it to be absolutely sure about what the messaging was. But then not to take that story forward was really disappointing. But I can't believe that they're an island in the borough, that they're not being seen by other, that experience is not noted by the communications role within the council, that they didn't dip in and say, you need a hand here. What are you going to tell us? What messages do you need to get out? Because as I was saying, around Ealing, the 14 stories, they were very much administrative. It's being introduced, we're doing some changes. They weren't about widening that discussion. And the broadest, I'm not on all the social media that councils, I'm not on Facebook, I do some Twitter, but very little messaging came out on Twitter, for example. It was about, here's consultation starting. It wasn't about, here's a bit of information that might inform you. So I really do worry about for service officers, and I'm not saying a particular department, it could be a pan council, understanding that role and connection about their responsibility to inform comms that this is a story or something that needs to come out there. And I wonder if that's part of the culture, and I wonder if that's going to happen going forward. I can appreciate there's lots of changes with comms, but I'd sort of offer that feedback about how we're going to see that change in a very tangible way happen with the communications. Thank you.
Thank you. Any feedback from officers?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Driscoll, for your sort of further feedback. I think probably what I can say here this evening is, as you've said, the independent review is clear that there is a lot of learning for the council. Some of it specific to the LTN policy execution and or kind of the active travel policy, wider policy area. Some of it, as you've pointed out, is more general and could be applied to other significant changes or issues which will be contentious kind of in the community. In terms of how that's being sort of taken forward, then it's very clear that responding and doing better on that agenda across the council is a priority. The council plan, which was adopted in July, but a very strong focus on explicitly shifting the council's culture and being more open, transparent, accountable and engaging with residents. That's, internally definitely translates to specific work streams for myself and the comms teams, for other officers. And I think the cultural change that you sort of describe of narrowing the gap between the way we talk to residents and the service or policy professional will be part of that change. Clearly, it's far too early to say that we've done all of that work or that we've been fully successful on that work, but I think I probably can give you some reassurance, which I think it might be what you're sort of looking for, that there is very active, both driven at senior officer level and from the political administration view to learn some of those lessons and to think how very practically what will that mean we do differently going forward. And comms and engagement will be a very important part of that. Won't be all of it, but it will be an important part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran. Thank you for coming back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do not see any more hands. So we will conclude with our discussion. And now we will move on to the recommendation part. So based on the information provided and the discussion we had, what is the recommendation from the panel? Who wants to go first? Okay, Councillor Driscoll, what recommendation do you want to make?
I mean, this is probably a bit on the hoof just because we've just gone through it now, but it's something to consider and maybe refine. But the role of identifying and I probably could phrase this better, but just speaking as I'm thinking about it now, is the role of understanding for service officers the ability to identify stories, information, data that could be useful to communicate so whether it's media training, whether it's media awareness, and that doesn't have to be extensive, but making sure that the service officers that are responsible there know how to identify a story, know what's important to identify, and how to pass that on to comms, and how that partnership of working should exist and should be routine. So I think we need to make sure that there's that link, because I know work's going on in that area, but it'd be good to see that it becomes very tangible and that becomes embedded in the culture. There's probably an easier way of saying that, but that's the sense of what I'm driving towards at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and just quickly giving my own input as well, that I mean there are officers as well internally, they are working in different departments. I think it will be very useful for them as well if they know what's happening in other departments. If there is an internal communication between the officers, that makes their lives easier. So, this is something which I caught by another officer saying that. Okay, I will move on to Coolam, Mr. Coolam, Matthew Coolam.
Hi there. Yeah, I guess there's just two things that I think came out of this for me. One is about the importance of hard copy information, because there are still a lot of digitally excluded people in the borough, and they rely on that. They rely on things like Around Ealing magazine. It's a key source of information for them if they can't get online. And the other thing was around the digital information. I think there's quite a lot of people said about the front page of the website could be redesigned. I would say that moving away from priority pages, because it's quite utilitarian. Great is good for the greatest number and all that, but it means the people that are most likely to need things like adult social care and blue badges are the ones, they have to hunt around for it, and they're going to be the least likely to be able to do that effectively. So my personal preference would be something similar to a borough like Kingston, where they've got a lot more links on the front page, a lot more buttons on the front page where people can just click on those and go directly without having to hunt around. That was all I had.
Okay, thank you. Anyone has got any recommendation? No? Okay, and I would give my recommendation that we just discussed that council has lots of external websites. So there should be a connection between those external websites with the main one. So we should have some kind of interface, and we definitely have to look at the information, sort of a directory style section on the website where the information of different organizations offering services to residents can be found easily. And the transactional side of it, how we can improve this one further when people are trying to contact council, where this information is going and how this can be improved and responded to efficiently. And then I think this is it. Any other suggestion? No? Okay, so I guess we have got everything summed up in this recommendation section. So we can now move on to item 8, which is our panel's work program. And this is over to Harjit.
Thank you, Chair. So from today's meeting, the presentation from Young Ealing Foundation has now been deferred to the next meeting on the 17th of March. And at that meeting, we've also got the substantive item of the effectiveness of the current resident engagement through specific channels.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we conclude our meeting. So that's the end of it. So now the next date for the meeting is 17th of March 2022, which is next year, and that will be 7 p.m. as usual. So thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you all the officers and the co-optee. So hopefully we will see you next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.